Okay, so this is actually a re-upload of a video that I published yesterday, and the reason why I'm redoing this is because there were two entries in that video that a lot of you were saying did not belong on this list. So I'm going to be taking those two entries out and replacing them with two other Pokemon which I believe are well deserving to be on this list. So yeah, do keep that in mind when you're watching this video. Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon Go video. Alright, so for today's video, I'm going to be counting down 8 of the most forgotten Pokemon in Pokemon Go. Every single one of these Pokemon are currently in Pokemon Go right now, but some of them you cannot get anymore through raids or catching in the wild. You just simply have to wait till Niantic re-releases them, or you will need to get them through some sort of trade with another player. Now for a majority of these Pokemon, they're not necessarily going to be gameplay relevant, they're not necessarily going to be one of the best Pokemon for PvP or raid battles, but for one reason or another, players forgot that they even exist in the game. And for much of that, it's because of Niantic. They just simply do not re-release a bunch of these Pokemon over time. And I think for some of them, they're just simply put, some of the rarest Pokemon that players are not even aware of. So for this video, I do think it's great that we could put a spotlight on these 8 Pokemon because hopefully Niantic will eventually bring them back into Pokemon Go, and for many other players, maybe they will finally realize that these Pokemon exist in the game and they're going to go out and actually look for them. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first Pokemon that I want to talk about is going to be Ditto. Now this Pokemon, ever since it was released, had a lot of notoriety. The reason for that is because for a lot of players, this is one of those Pokemon that had an interesting gimmick. When you use it in battle, it would actually turn into the Pokemon that it is going against. So that means if you have 100% IVs or even a shiny version of this Pokemon, you could actually catch the shiny version of the opposing Pokemon. Unfortunately, this Pokemon has seen a very limited release ever since it was first introduced into the game, and it seems like Niantic has completely neglected this Pokemon because you really do not ever see it when you play Pokemon Go. There are certain Pokemon that used to be able to transform into Ditto and it would rotate every season, but for the last couple of seasons, Niantic has forgotten to bring back this Pokemon, so there's definitely a lot of players out there who still do not have it. I also think that when it comes to the shiny form of Ditto, it is a big prize for a lot of different collectors, mainly because it's really difficult to get and Niantic has not released this Pokemon often, so it's quite rare to have yourself a shiny Ditto. If you happen to have one, it's definitely going to be a highlight of your account, and if Niantic were to ever bring it back, I think that's one of the priorities you should have in trying to get the shiny form. Okay, so for the next entries, I actually originally had both Venonat and Pidgey as forgotten Pokemon, but those are the Pokemon that I took out because I quickly realized that for a lot of you, you are actually seeing these Pokemon all over the place when it comes to wild spawns. And the reason for that is because, well, Niantic switches up what Pokemon you're going to come across depending on whatever region you're living in. And where I currently live in Chicago, both of these Pokemon are non-existent, so it's very easy for me to forget about them, and it's why I originally included them on this list. But I realized that both of those Pokemon just do not apply for everyone. So instead of those two Pokemon, I'm actually going to be including both Apex Shadow Lugia and Apex Shadow Ho-Oh. When you think about forgotten Pokemon, these two Pokemon are definitely well deserving to be on this list. And the reason why I say that is because Niantic only released these Pokemon once, and they were for a paid research ticket that only a select few players were able to do. And the reason for that is because it was available after Pokemon Go Fest. So I think for a lot of players, they do not have either of these very powerful shadow Pokemon, especially if they were not playing the game at the time that they were released. And I do think that it is something that Niantic should bring back into Pokemon Go. I do believe at one point, I could be misremembering here, but they did actually bring them back at one point, but it was really just another encounter for them. So yeah, I could be completely wrong. I only have one of each in my collection, and I feel like if they did bring it back, I would actually have 2 of them. But regardless, they were very unique and very special in that when you were to purify them, you actually got a super powerful version of their signature move. And I think that was something that I felt like Niantic should have done a lot more. It's something that they should explore, bringing out more Apex Shadow legendaries, because when it comes to shadow Pokemon, you're seldom ever incentivized to actually purify them. So I really like what they did here with both Ho-Oh and Lugia, and I kind of wish they brought them back, because at this point, they are both very powerful Pokemon that a lot of players have forgotten about. Now the next Pokemon on this list is a bit of a recent addition to Pokemon GO, relatively speaking. It's going to be, of course, Kecleon. Now this Pokemon, when it was first released into Pokemon GO, definitely drew a lot of buzz. And the reason for that is because there was years of hype around the release of this Pokemon. And when Niantic finally released it, a lot of players were excited that they were finally able to complete their Pokedexes for that generation. However, ever since it was released into Pokemon GO, people have seemingly completely forgotten about it. It's not one of those things that a lot of players actually pay attention to, and if they see it in the wild, it becomes a bit of a nuisance. They just completely ignore it within those Pokestops and they just go about their day. I feel like because of that, a lot of players tend to forget that Kecleon exists, and I think that's really hilarious, because at the time, this was one of the most hyped releases in Pokemon GO, but it completely fell off over time. People just simply do not care about it. Now the next Pokemon that I want to talk about is one that you could actually pick up right now. It's Vivillon. Now, this Pokemon does have a very unique condition for how you can encounter it. Basically, you need to save up a whole bunch of postcards, and eventually you're going to get yourself a Vivillon. It's one of those things that Niantic implemented in a very cool way, but players have seemingly completely forgot about it. It's very rare that I ever come across a player who actually has one of these Pokemon, and the reason for that is because when it comes to it, it does require a lot of effort and a really big friends list from all around the world. You could pick up yourself a whole variety of different kinds of Vivillons, but it's all dependent on what postcards you save around the world. There's certainly players out there who are trying to get every single one of the different versions, but overall, I think for the average player, they have completely forgotten about this Pokemon's existence. Now the next Pokemon that I'm going to be talking about is one that a lot of players have completely forgotten about, even though it is incredibly powerful, and that is going to be Armored Mewtwo. Now the reason why a lot of players have forgotten about this Pokemon's existence is simply because Niantic has had such an extremely limited release when it comes to this Pokemon. Considering that it was a tie-in to a movie that was released, a lot of players just simply do not have this Pokemon in their collection because Niantic did not release it often. It's one of those legendaries that you do not see in raids, and the very few times it is released in raids, players are surprised because they've probably completely forgotten about its existence. But for a lot of those players who do have this Pokemon, they have a Pokemon that is really good for PvP. It has a lot of bulky, tanky stats, but on top of that, a lot of damage dealing potential as well. So because of that, I do feel like this is one of those legendaries that Niantic should bring back regardless if there's a tie-in. And I really hope they do because it's such an incredible Pokemon. Now the next entry on this list is actually going to be a mythical Pokemon, and it is going to be Victini. Now the reason why I have Victini on this list, even though a lot of players probably already use this Pokemon within certain specialty cups, it's because at the time that it was released, we of course had the pandemic. It was the first time we had a Pokemon Go Fest where you could play it from home, and I think because of that, a lot of players tend to look at that one Pokemon Go Fest and really not pay attention to what they got. It's kind of interesting because I feel like when people look back at when Victini was released, it got overshadowed quite a bit by one Pokemon, and I'm of course talking about Shadow Mewtwo. At the same Pokemon Go Fest, you could get both Victini as well as Shadow Mewtwo, and I think because of that, there was a lot of hype that was drawn away from Victini at the time it was released. Until we get a Pokemon Go Fest featuring this Pokemon, I do not believe a lot of players will actually care about it. And I think that's a real shame because this Pokemon is actually really good. It's one of those that you could use in PvP to great potential, and I do think that for a lot of players who do have this Pokemon, it's one that they definitely will probably use when it comes to certain specialty cups. Now for the final entry on this list, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of you who are going to be surprised that you've completely forgotten about it. It is going to be Professor Pikachu. Now this is a special costume Pikachu that you can get from winning 100 showcases, and I think a lot of players have completely forgotten about its existence. Doing a lot of showcases is actually pretty tough, considering that the conditions that are needed for you to win those showcases are pretty specific. I feel like a lot of players have completely forgotten that you could actually pick up one of these special costume Pikachus if you win 100 of them. Basically, if you win 100 showcases, you will get the Platinum Achievement, and then when you get that Platinum Achievement, the reward is going to be this special Pokemon. And I'm telling you right now, very few players have this Pokemon. It's incredibly difficult to win 100 Pokestop showcases. And I think because of that, this Pokemon either is forgotten or it's going to be one of those Pokemon that a lot of players tend to feel like they'll never obtain it. But for the most part, it's one that definitely draws a lot of eyes whenever you have it as your buddy, especially when people are sending you gifts and opening your gifts. They'll just come across your profile, see that Pikachu, and then remember that it even exists in this game. So yeah, definitely for a list like this, I had to include Professor Pikachu. But yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know your thoughts regarding everything that I talked about down below. Do you have any of these particular Pokemon? Is there a particular Pokemon that I should have included on this list? Definitely mention what that is down below in the comments, and let's have a great discussion. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. My name is Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.